Hey, what's up, guys? So a few of you have been asking me what my sort of secret weapons go-to plugins are ahead of Black Friday, so you can go and get some good deals. So I'm going to give you a rundown of some ones that I think are great and that I know are on sale as well, so you can grab them before Friday. So in this tutorial, we're going to be looking at Track Spacer, and the Waves plugins that are kind of my go-to ones that I use loads are the L2 Ultra Maximizer, which is like a sort of classic limiter, bass fingers, which I'm not going to demo in this video, but that's if you listen to our track Surrender, the link is further. It's in the section of the newsletter where I put the links to the to the plugins. If you click there, you can hear that bass fingers being used in our track Surrender. There's Ovox, which is an amazing vocoder, Silk Vocal, which is like a smart EQ, Clarity Vox, which can clean up bad recordings, and the Vitamin Sonic Enhancer, which I kind of use as a mastering tool. Okay, so let's jump over to Ableton and get into it. Okay, so I've got a basic track here that, well, it's not arranged or anything. I've just got the clips. Most of the stuff's come from the samples from my beginner's course. So I'll just show you what we've got. So we've got a kick, top loop, some percussion, bass. Let's just change that to my bass color. Some pads. A lead. A bad audio recording. Okay, so I've got the fan blowing right next to me, and then a very raw vocal.
In the music.
All right, so let's just go through one by one, and I'll show you all of the different plugins and how they can be used in this track. So let's start off with the kick. So on the kick, you can see here, I've got no EQ on there. I've just got a limiter here. So I would use the Waves L2 on a kick, for example. So I'll put that before this limiter here. And then you can literally just pull this down until it reaches the signal of the kick. Just before it starts to distort. And then you've got room here to push it a bit harder. So you can just get a little bit of extra volume out of your kick without it kind of starting to sound crushed and distorted. Okay, so what else have we got? Okay, so we could use like the Ultra Maximizer on something like this lead. Just kind of gives it a bit more power and weight, and it's a very clean sounding limiter. You don't get that obvious kind of limited compressed sound, I guess. Okay, so let's look at this vocal here. So let's just play everything together. So you can tell that things are already sort of like quite muffled because nothing's been treated properly. So let's start by looking at, so if we just solo these parts here, the vocal, the bass, the pad, and the lead. So the first thing that we maybe want to do is get the vocal to sort of sit a bit better. So we can use the Silk Vocal plugin for that. Now this is a kind of smart EQ and a kind of a reactive multiband dynamic. So if you kind of get resonance spikes in the signal that's coming from the vocal, then it'll turn stuff down in real time. So let's take a look at that, and you can just. I mean, it's easier if I just kind of do an on off of how it sounds. So you can set it to male or female, so that'll choose the kind of where the frequencies are working. Because obviously male voices are deeper than female voices. So let's just listen to the difference here. I'm just going to pop this back here at the start of the chain. Let's just take away the low end there. So this is without.
In the music, so in the music, so in the music,
So if you look here, you can see it's turning down loads of the low end, and it's picking up some of the high sibilances, like that are kind of the sharp things that you might get rid of with a de-esser, and a little bit of the mids as well.
in the music.
So you can see the S from music. That might be piercing, but it's getting dealt with here. So if you keep an eye on this bit here.
In the music, so in the music.
Okay, the next thing that would be a good thing to demonstrate here would be track spacer, because track spacer is great at creating space for certain sounds within other sounds. So you've got a very sort of thick, constant pad here. So it's both wide and dense in terms of the frequencies, and it's kind of vocal sounds as well. So this vocal might get lost.
In the music.
It's not actually too bad, but many vocals kind of do get lost in sort of pads and things like that. So this is where you would use track spacer. So what we do is put track spacer onto the thing that we want to create the space in. So in this case, it's the pad. I'm going to pop it here after the limiter. Now, the reason I'm putting it after the limiter is when you do any kind of side chaining, if you put a limiter after that, it kind of fills in the holes that you've created by sort of turning the loud parts down, the quiet parts up. So you're kind of undoing the work you've done. So always the rule is, if you're going to do any kind of EQing like this, any kind of reductive EQing, do that first, then limiting, and then any kind of side chaining. So I would always do sort of track spacer stuff first, and then if you're going to do a side chain against the kick, do that last in the chain. Okay, so from here we're going to select the vocal from this list. So we've got those two soloed, so you can hear what happens now.
In the music,
so what's happening at the moment is it's turning all frequencies down when the vocal plays, and you can hear that the pad disappears. So we don't want that. It's sounding like a very obvious side chain. Let's just listen to that again.
in the music,
It is making the vocal sound very clear, but at the detriment of the pad. So what we can do is we're going to restrict the frequencies that are going to be affected, just to try and focus in on the most important part of the vocal. So let's just look here. You can see here is where the main part of the vocal is that we want. So let's restrict the area to about here.
In the music,
Already you can hear that the pad's not being affected so much. The next thing that I'm going to do is just turn down the amount of sidechain that's being done, because we don't need it to be that strong. It just needs to be subtle.
in the music,
So the sweet spot here is getting it so it doesn't sound like the pad's being affected at all, but you can hear the vocal more clearly.
in the music, in the music.
Now, the next part of this, which I think is genius, is if you click through to this advanced tab here, then you can change it from left, right to mid-side mode. So this pad is quite wide, but the vocal's sat right in the center. So what's happening at the moment is the frequencies of the vocal are getting turned down across the whole stereo field, but really we only want it to be affected in the center where the vocal actually is. So if we turn this from left-right mode to mid-side mode, it's only going to react where the vocal is sat in the stereo field.
Soul in the music, soul in the music.
So now you've got a nice clean sound where it doesn't sound like anything's being degraded or turned down, and you've created a little bit of space for these clashing frequencies. So we'll do that again now. I'm just going to duplicate this. This time I'm going to choose the lead, which is on 6. There we go. Okay, so let's just take that off and solo that instead. So we'll leave the mid-side mode on because for me personally, the mid-side mode is most useful at all times in any application of this. I always use mid-side mode. Okay, so let's take a look. So let's just put the full frequency range back. So it's a slightly different frequency that we want to target here. It's more kind of in this range here rather than up here. So you want to preserve that and here. So it's just helping it pop through slightly. So now if we listen to the 3 together.
In the music, soul in the music.
Now often what people will do as well is if you've got a very dense project and everything's very loud, you really need to help that vocal to cut through. So what people will often do is put a subtle version of this this track spacer with the vocal on lots of different sounds. So we're going to put it on the lead here as well.
In the music.
I'm just going to turn it down so it's very subtle.
In the music, soul in the music, soul.
Okay, so moving on now for a different application of track spacer. I mean, it's the same thing, but it's just using different sounds. So that you've got the bass and the kick here. Now, a typical sidechain for these two sounds would be just a normal compressor or kickstart or whatever you like to use. And we can see here, it's just turning the whole volume down every time the kick hits. You might want to do the kind of more sort of French house pumping sound. But let's say you wanted to remain really clean and you didn't want any kind of pumping sidechain effect, then you could use track spacer. So what we'll do here is put it on mid-side again. So if it's the kick's generally going to be in the center, and if the bass is wide, then we only want it to remove the frequencies in the middle and not touch the outside. So move back to here. So if we listen to this now, it's going to do exactly the same thing as the other compressor was, because it's turning down all the frequencies. Oh, we haven't selected the kick. There we go. So you can still hear that bass pumping because it's getting turned down every time the kick hits. So what we can do is the only frequencies that we really need to deal with here is everything sort of like under maybe 150. So if we pull this down to about here, then we can maybe be a little bit more subtle. And now we've got a nice clean sound compared to this. What I like to do is use a combination of the two, because I quite like the little bounce that you get from the groove. Just a tiny amount like that, reducing by about 2 dB. Just helps it sort of glue it into the track and makes it feel like it's bouncing gently with the other elements in the track. Okay, let's take a look at what we've got here. So maybe you might want something like these drums to pop through in the bass. So you could use a track spacer in here. Right, if you're starting to use track spacer a lot in lots of different elements in the track, because it's easy to get carried away with it, just be very aware that you need to be subtle here, because if you overdo it, it'll trash your track. So if you look here, we've already got rid of the low end of these perks. So I'm going to get rid of the low end there. Preserve this low one here, and then we've just got a few kind of up here, so I'm going to restrict this to here, and then pull this down so it's just very subtle. Mid-side mode on. And then the percussion's popping through a little bit better. Okay, so next let's look at this dirty recording over here. Okay, so I've got the fan blowing right next to me, so you can get loads of noise. So I've put like tape, hiss, vinyl, crackle, and all sorts of things on that. It's an absolutely terrible recording. So the likelihood is that you won't be looking at a recording that bad, but it's good to demonstrate what clarity Vox can do. So literally, wait until my vocal comes in. Okay, so I've got the fan blowing right next to me, so you can get loads of noise, and then we'll use clarity Vox to clean it up, and you can hear the difference. So that one's a really easy one to demonstrate. Very useful if you're ripping like recordings of, you know, like people sort of speaking, you know, on that are being interviewed outdoors or something like that from YouTube or wherever, anything that's kind of got background noise and things like that. This is great for that. Okay, so from there, let's now look at Ovox, which is this vocoder. Okay, so I've got the fan blowing right next to me, so you can get loads of noise, and then we'll use... Sorry. Okay, so I'll just try and find some of the really typical ones that you would know. There we go. Get Lucky, Daft Punk. Okay, so I'm blowing right next to me, so you get noise. Okay, maybe it's not the best example. Let me go and find a different vocal that's playing a little bit more. Okay, so I've got a different vocal here that's kind of playing constantly, so you can hear the effect. So let's just turn this clarity Vox off now, because we haven't got the muddy sample, and then you can hear some of the presets on this Ovox.
What I like, she confident, knows what she wants, say papa shit, ain't changing plans, we're about to dead now. On the contrary, she ready to straight it out. What I like, she confident, knows what she wants, say papa shit, ain't changing plans. What I like, she confident, knows what she wants, say papa shit, ain't changing plans. What she confident, knows what she wants, say papa shit, ain't what I like. What I like, she confident, knows what she wants, say papa shit, ain't what I like. What?
Okay, what else have we got in there?
What I like, she confident, knows what she wants, say papa shit, ain't what I like. She confident, knows what she wants, say papa.
There we go, from Air, Sexy Boy.
What I like, she confident, knows what she wants, say papa shit, ain't what I like. She confident, knows what she wants, say papa shit, ain't.
So you get the idea with that one. It's very very useful if you want to do some like cool vocoded effects on vocals. Okay, so finally, I'll just show you the last few things on here. So if we just play all of this stuff together now. Let's just go and do a little bit of treatment on here. So we've done the bass on there. Let's just do a little bit of sidechain against the kick on here. And here. And here as well. Okay, so it's kind of like treated as it would be in a normal track now. So if we look at the main track here, you can see we're getting a kind of 5 dB volume spike there. So I'm just going to show you a quick mastering chain using the Waves L2 Ultra Maximizer, the Vitamin Sonic Enhancer, which is another Waves one, and then just the normal limiter from Ableton as well. So if we start off with the L2, I would start with the L2. I would normally put like an EQ before this, but I won't go into that now. So I would just put the L2 on here and leave it at 0. Now, if your project is quieter than this, what I would do is use a utility. So let's just say that your project is like quiet like this and you're not touching anywhere near here. What I would do is solo the kick and then push this up until you kind of about 2 dB lower. See here, it's about 2 dB lower than the output ceiling. Okay, so I know that because mine's set at 2 dB, minus 2 dB here, that if this is at 0, it's going to be exactly minus 2 there. So you want it about there. So if your project's quiet, just use a utility and turn the gain up until you get to about minus 2 when the kick's playing. Now, if I play everything now, it's going to catch that 5 dB that was spiking and cap it at 0 dB, and it'll sound very clean. So it sounds exactly the same, but we're reducing the output by 5 dB, so you've got 5 dB extra headroom there. Now, if you're kind of making, like really loud music, if you wanted to, you could push this even harder now. So I'll demonstrate it. Okay, so I've pushed that up a further 2 dB and we're still getting a clean sound with 7 dB reduction here. Okay, so I think once you start getting higher than that, you're going to start hearing distortion. Still not that bad. If I turn this off now, it sounds horrendous, so you can see the effects that it's having. We're getting a 9 dB spike here. Sounds very distorted, but as soon as you use this L2, clean and clear. Okay, so I'm just going to pull this back down to 0 because I don't want to push it that hard. Okay, so now let's look at the Vitamin Sonic Enhancer. Okay, so it's basically, you've got 5 frequency bands here, and it's just a booster that uses saturation. So what I would usually do, if you're kind of a little bit weak in the low end, boost the low end a little bit, but more often than not, I'll brighten up the tops with it. So here you've got stereo width, and here you've got the boost. So my typical use on this would be just to boost here and widen the top slightly. So if you listen to it with and without, you can just bring it to life slightly. And maybe I would put that before there just so it caps everything. Okay, so if we just turn both of these off now. And then finally, I would put on a stock Ableton limiter. Set at 0 dB. Turn auto on, and then just give it an extra 2 dB boost. So we're still at 0 dB there. So in theory, it's just to get the same headroom. So we were spiking at 5, I believe, before. So to get that down under 0 dB there, so let's remove that. Might move that down to -5. Okay, so it's still spiking, and now we turn on the mastering chain. Okay, so that's it for my tips on plugins. So Trackspace is at half price at the moment. I think from €60 down to 30, or maybe it's dollars actually, US dollars, so that's even cheaper. And then the Wave stuff is 2 plugins for 29 or 39 maybe, and then I think 5 for 99. So one thing to note with the Waves ones, just make sure that you buy a kind of like a standalone one-time only purchase rather than signing up to their subscription model. Otherwise, you've got to pay every month. So I think if you do the deal where it's 5 plugins, sorry, it's 2 plugins 49, 5 plugins 99. So if you do that, then you own it for life, and you don't have to pay anything again. Okay, have fun.